Shaila Ahmed, born on July 14, 1986, was a British Pakistani girl. Her father, Iftikhar Ahmed, originally came from the Gujarat district in Pakistan. At around 20 to 22 years old, Iftikhar moved to Britain for work. During his time there, he fell in love with a foreign woman, married her, and soon became a father. Upon returning to Pakistan to inform his family of the marriage, they refused to accept it. Under intense pressure from his family, Iftikhar reluctantly agreed to marry a Pakistani woman named Farzana. After the wedding, Iftikhar returned to Britain and disclosed the situation to his first wife, eventually divorcing her. Later, he brought Farzana to Britain from Pakistan. The couple settled in Bradford, West Yorkshire, where Shaila Ahmed was born on July 14, 1986. Shortly after her birth, the family relocated to Warrington, Britain, where Shaila completed her early education. Over time, the family expanded with the birth of 2 more daughters. Although this family resides in Britain on holidays, Iftikhar used to take his wife and all his children to Pakistan for vacation. Now the year had come, 2003, and by now Shaila Ahmed had also turned 17 and was studying law. Her dream was to become a lawyer. When Shaila and the other children have a break on February 18, 2003, Shaila comes to Pakistan with her family for vacation. During their trip to Pakistan, this family also participates in a family wedding ceremony. However, just a few days after this wedding, a major incident occurs with Shaila. She accidentally drinks fennel floor cleaner. Actually, fennel is commonly used in Asia for cleaning floors in homes. Now, because fennel is made by mixing some chemicals and soap, drinking it causes severe pain in Shaila's throat. The reason behind Shaila drinking fennel is initially said to be because her parents pressured her into arranged marriage with a Pakistani boy. Because of this pressure, Shaila drank the fennel intending to end her life. But later, her parents claimed that someone had poured fennel into an old bottle of water, kept in the same bottle usually used for drinking water, and in the darkness of the night, Shaila mistook fennel for water and drank it. Due to this mistake, Shaila had to endure a lot of pain. As a result, she's admitted to a hospital in Pakistan. Now, because Shaila's injury was quite severe, she has to stay in the hospital for a long time. During this time, the holidays of other family members also end. So Iftikhar takes his 2 children and wife back to Britain, while Shaila has to stay in Pakistan for treatment. However, shortly after, Iftikhar arranges for Shaila's return as well. And on May 27, 2003, Shaila returns to Britain. Straight from the airport, Shaila is admitted to a hospital for treatment through an ambulance. After several months of treatment, Shaila's throat heals considerably, and now she rejoins college. Alongside college, she also starts a part-time job. But on September 18, 2003, a college teacher notices that Shaila Ahmed hasn't been coming to college for the past week. Attempts are made to contact Shaila via phone, but she cannot be reached. When teacher asked about this to Shaila's parents, they revealed that Shaila has not been home for the past week. Their daughter has been missing for a week, and her parents hadn't filed any complaints about her yet, which strikes Shaila's teacher as very strange. Immediately after this, they inform the police. Upon filing the case, a police team arrives at Shaila's house for investigation, and questioning begins with her parents. Shaila's parents say that they last saw Shaila at their home on September 11, 2003, and since then, she hasn't been seen. Upon this, the police ask, "When your daughter has been missing for a week, why haven't you filed a complaint with the police yet?" To this, Shaila's parents respond, "This is not the first time Shaila has been missing from home for a few days. It has happened several times before." To confirm this, when the police check the records, it is revealed that Shaila has been missing from home several times in the past. The first time was when Shaila was only 12 years old. She went missing with her younger sister on March 10, 1998. Because of this, her parents had also filed a missing report for both their daughters with the police. However, at that time, Shaila returned home with her sister as evening approached. According to records, Shaila ran away from home for the second time on November 25, 2002. Once again, her father, Iftikhar Ahmed, filed a missing report for his daughter. After extensive searching, Shaila was found by the police sitting in a park. According to police records, for the third time, Shaila left home with a friend on February 3, 2003. This time, Shaila did not return home for 2 days. And then on February 5, 2003, she went to a safe house for orphan people and filed a report against her parents for domestic violence and mental abuse. After the report was filed, the police officer spoke with Shaila Ahmed and her parents. And after everything was cleared up, Shaila returned home. After this, on February 18, 2003, Shaila, along with her 2 sisters and parents, goes to Pakistan for a family function and disappears from there shortly after returning to Britain. Now looking at old records, the police also suspect that Shaila Ahmed may have gone somewhere again this time and will return home in a few days. Therefore, the police try to find Shaila in all those places where she could have gone. However, even after a few days, the police cannot find any trace of Shaila from anywhere. Considering Shaila's history of running away from home before, the police show a little laziness in the investigation this time. After this, some local media start making an issue out of the police's laziness. As a result, demand for a thorough search for Shaila increases at the local level. Due to the progress in the Shaila missing case, the police accelerate their investigation. Subsequently, they discover numerous poems written by Shaila at her home. These poems reveal her dissatisfaction with her household environment. Her parents wished for Shaila to lead a traditional Pakistani girl's life, but she favored Western culture. Through her poetry, she expressed this pain. As Shaila's poems reach the public, the case gains momentum, putting pressure on the police to find her. Consequently, law enforcement intervenes, intensifying their search efforts in places Shaila could have visited. Eventually, CCTV footage confirms Shaila's identity as Smard. A few days after Shaila went missing, her parents identified her. This made the police believe that at least Shaila was alive. However, a new turn in the case occurs when the CCTV footage shows Shaila's class teacher. Actually, when the picture is shown to Shaila's class teacher, they say that the girl in the photo is not Shaila Ahmed. Some other people also confirm by watching the CCTV footage that the girl in the footage is not Shaila. Now the police find it very strange that Shaila's parents themselves did not recognize their daughter from the CCTV footage. The police had many questions in their minds. And to find the answers to those questions, they secretly installed some audio recording devices at Shaila's home. The police were listening to everything that was happening in Shaila's house through an audio recording device. According to the recording, one day Iftikhar is heard saying, "In Britain, if you kill 40 people and there is no evidence against you, then the law here can't do anything to you." Additionally, one day Iftikhar Ahmad is heard saying, "If the police collect DNA samples from inside the car, what could happen?" Furthermore, the audio recording device captures some suspicious conversations that lead the police to suspect that perhaps Shaila's father had something to do with his daughter. Now, because the police start to doubt Iftikhar Ahmed, they use his audio recordings as evidence. And on December 18, 2003, the police arrest Iftikhar and his wife Farzana Ahmed, along with 5 other family members on charges of murdering Shaila and hiding her body. The police had arrested these people solely on suspicion. The police hoped that during the investigation, some concrete evidence would be found against these peoples. However, no evidence was found against any of the arrested persons, and eventually, the police released them all. It had been a year since 2004, and there was still no evidence in the case of Shaila Ahmed. The police were engaged in efforts to locate Shaila. Meanwhile, floods occurred in the famous Kent River flowing from the Sedgwick area of Britain. When the floods were under control, the body of a girl were found in extremely poor condition on the banks of this river. The distance between the place where the body was found and where Shaila Ahmed had disappeared was 70 miles. But still, the police have doubts whether this corpse could be Shaila's. However, to confirm this, DNA samples are collected from the dead body and then matched with the DNA of Iftikhar and Farzana. In this case, a major twist occurs when a body washed away in the flood matches with the DNA samples of Iftikhar. This meant that the body washed away from the river was not someone else's but Shaila Ahmed's, meaning in the search for Shaila Ahmed, whom the police had been looking for the past year, now reaches the police itself in the form of a corpse. Now the biggest question in front of the police was who and why murdered Shaila Ahmed. However, even before the statements and actions of corpse parents, there were doubts. And in 2003, these two, along with 5 others, were arrested. Therefore, once again, Shafilia's parents are arrested and questioned. The trial of this case is also going on, but even this time, no allegations can be proven against them, which leads the police to release them again. However, after that, the police detain some other suspects and proceed with the investigation against all of them. But despite many efforts, the police cannot reach the murderer. As time passes, people slowly start to forget about Shaila Ahmed's case. Shaila disappeared in 2003, and now it was 2010. That is, it had been 7 years since Shafilia's death. By now, Shafilia's family had also moved on from the incident and had become busy with their daily lives. But then on August 25, 2010, a major theft occurs at Iftikhar Ahmed's house. By now, Iftikhar Ahmed's family had already become the center of attention in the city due to their daughter's disappearance. Due to this, when theft occurs in this house, it starts making headlines on the front page of newspapers. But once again, this puts heavy pressure on the police. Despite working honestly, the police quickly get involved in the search for the thief. After many days of hard work, the police make a revelation that surprises everyone. Actually, the police arrest not someone else, but Iftikhar Ahmed's daughter, Alicia Ahmed, on charges of theft in the house. In fact, Alicia was Shafila's younger sister. According to Alicia, she didn't get as much money from home as she demanded and needed. Because of this, she orchestrated the theft of her father's money at her own home. However, the police had solved the theft case very quickly, but the police spot an opportunity here and now. They start talking to Alicia about her sister Shafilia, who disappeared many years ago, and reopen the file related to the Shafilia case. In the initial conversation, the police suspect that Alicia knows something about the disappearance of Shafilia that the world is still unaware of. The police officers try to uncover what happened with Shafilia, but Alicia refuses to cooperate with them. However, the police then tell Alicia, "You have orchestrated a theft in your own house, which could lead to a long prison sentence for you. But if you can provide any information about Shafila that nobody else knows, your sentence could be significantly reduced." Afterwards, when Alicia reveals some details to the police, everyone is left stunned. Alicia explains, "It was not someone else but my father, Iftikhar, and my mother Farzana Ahmed, who had beaten Shaila Ahmad in front of all of us sisters. Then our father put polyfine on her face, and due to suffocation, she was dead. Then he placed Shafila's body in his car and threw it into the distant jungle. However, due to the flood, the body drifted to the riverbank from the jungle." According to Alicia, Iftikhar and Farzara did not like their daughter's modern lifestyle at all. On the surface, Shafilia started falling in love with a boy. And when this matter comes to light, Iftikhar and Farzana quickly try to arrange Shafila's marriage with their preferred boy. When the family goes to Pakistan for a family function, there is an attempt to forcefully marry Shafila to a boy there. But Kafilia refuses to marry for this reason, and she consumes fennel. After that, her health deteriorates and her marriage does not happen either. When Kafilia returns to Britain, her family members here also insist on arranging her marriage with a boy of their choice. But when Shafila repeatedly refuses this marriage, her father gets angry, and at first beats Shafila in anger and then covers her face with a polythene bag. And then due to suffocation, Shafia Ahmad dies here. But immediately after this disclosure, Alicia Ahmed becomes a government witness in the case. In exchange, she is assured a minimum sentence in the theft case. However, based on Alicia's statement on September 2, 2010, Farzala and Iftikhar are arrested, and then a case of their own daughter's murder is pursued against them. Both of them remain in jail for several months after the arrest. However, nearly a year later, on September 15, 2011, they are granted bail by the Manchester Crown Court. In the further investigation, the police gather some crucial evidence. And based on that evidence, the trial of this case begins in the Chester Crown Court on May 21, 2012. Initially, Farzana and Iftikhar continue to deny their involvement in their daughter's murder. But when Farzana begins to suspect that she is being framed for her own daughter's murder, she finally accepts in court on July 9, 2012 that Shaila Ahmed's murder was not committed by anyone else, but by Iftikhar Ahmed himself. In her statement, Farzana also reveals that she tried to stop Iftikhar, but instead, Iftikhar beat and threatened her family, saying, "If any of you ever talk about this to anyone, your fate will be just like Shafilia's." Now, 2 witnesses had testified against Iftikhar Ahmed. Besides, the police who gather evidence also indicate that it was Iftikhar Ahmed who murdered Shafili's, then threw her body far into the jungle. However, a natural disaster struck that area, and with the floodwaters, Shafilia's body drifted and reached the riverbank on its own. After a lengthy trial in August 2012, Farzana and Iftikhar are found guilty of murdering their own daughter and disposing of her body after the murder. They are then sentenced to 25 years each. It is also proven in court that this was an honor killing. Following this verdict, every year on July 14th, Shaila Ahmed's birthday, the National Day of Memory for Victims of Honor Killings, is observed in her memory. So with this, the case of Shaila Ahmed comes to a close. However, perhaps nature also desired that Shaila Ahmed receive justice and her killers be punished. Therefore, albeit late, Shafilia's parents, her murderers, are also sentenced. In 1995, Mark Winger, a nuclear power plant technician from Springfield, Illinois, committed a shocking crime. He murdered his wife, Donna, by beating her to death with a hammer. In an even more sinister twist, Mark framed another person for the murder, married his child's nanny soon after, and managed to evade justice for nearly 4 years. So, how did he get away with it? Hi, and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael. Today, I'll take you through a case full of jaw-dropping twists. In June 1995, life seemed picture-perfect for Mark and Donna Winger. The couple had been happily married for several years and had just adopted a newborn baby girl named Bailey. Donna, the eldest of 3 sisters, came from what was described as an extremely close-knit family. The Drescher family embraced Mark as one of their own. Mark was smart, Jewish, attractive, and fun, Donna's sister Jenny Levin shared with the media. Donna just felt like she had found her person. After tying the knot in 1989, Mark was offered a job opportunity, and the newlyweds relocated to Springfield, Illinois. We always joked that when one sister marries, the husband marries all 3 sisters, Levin recalled. We shared our lives with Mark. Donna was working as an operating room technician and Mark was a nuclear engineer. Donna couldn't have been happier. The only thing she would have liked to was to have a child, her stepfather Ira Drescher said. Donna's mother, Sarah Jane Drescher, said her daughter was overwhelmed when she learned that she could not get pregnant. But then one day while working at the hospital, a doctor told Donna that a teenager was looking to put her baby up for adoption. Adopting the child was an easy decision for her. She looked at me with tears when she said, "Michelle, I knew it the minute they put the baby into my arms. She has always been mine," Donna's sister Michelle Hansen said. The Wingers welcomed baby Bailey into their home on June 1, 1995. Donna's family said the couple loved their new roles as parents. They seemed to have all the makings of a long and happy life together. Mark was just as excited to become a dad as Donna was to become a mom, Hansen said. Donna had met the woman who would eventually become her best friend, Diane Schultz, at the hospital. And with the arrival of Bailey, the two bonded over motherhood. But then everything turned dark. In August 1995, Donna took baby Bailey on a trip to Hollywood, Florida to visit Donna's family. Her mother had just dropped the two of them off at the airport and hired a driver to pick them up in St. Louis, Missouri and drive them back to Springfield. So after the visit, the two flew into St. Louis airport and hopped in a cab driven by Roger Harrington with a 2-hour ride back to Springfield. During the course of the drive, Harrington reportedly began flirting with Donna and talking about drugs and orgies. Detective Charlie Cox, a police officer who investigated Donna's death, later said, "This gentleman started opening up to Donna about issues he was having. He had a voice in his head named Dom. Dom would tell him to do bad things. Recently, Dom was telling him to hurt people." After Donna safely arrived home with Bailey, She called the transit company to make a formal complaint about Harrington's behavior, and the driver was suspended. Cox later said that the driver started flirting with Donna, telling her he liked older women and even invited her to attend what he described as one of his sex parties. Donna had told her family that the ride was terrifying because he was driving erratically at 75 miles per hour. After the harrowing ride, Donna had been the victim of some strange phone calls, Weinhoff said. The family had believed that the driver had been stalking her and was a danger. Donna called the limousine company to file a complaint and Harrington was suspended. Mark argued his wife to write down the story in case they might need it. Police later found the note describing Donna's harrowing ride in her handwriting at the crime scene. Donna also told Mark about the experience, and though he played a part of the supportive husband and helped her file the complaint, it turned out that he had old terrier motives for doing so. Just days later, Mark invited Harrington to their home, perhaps under the pretense of helping him get his job back. On the August 29, 1995, the cab driver wrote Mark's name, address, and the time on a scrap of paper in his car, drove to the Wingers' home, walked inside with a coffee cup and a pack of cigarettes, and was shot twice in the head. Mark Winger then called 911 and told the dispatcher he'd just shot a man who was killing his wife. He informed police that he'd been walking on the treadmill in the basement when he heard a commotion upstairs. He grabbed his gun, went to investigate, and found Harrington swinging a hammer at Donna. In an effort to defend his wife, he'd shot the man twice. Police arrived on the scene to find that both Donna and Harrington still had a weak pulse. Mark was in a back bedroom rolling back and forth in total shock. When former Springfield Police Detective Charlie Cox arrived at the Wingers' home, he remembered they could see the victims from the front door. Donna was clinging to life, said Sangamon County Assistant State Attorney Steve Weinhold. She had been hit no less than 7 times in the head with a hammer. The second victim, a white man, had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, but still had a pulse when police arrived, said Weinhoff. It was quite chaotic, Cox said. I knew that they were probably going to be transporting the victim soon, so I wanted to try and get identification on the male suspect. Cox found the man's wallet and was able to identify him as Roger Harrington. Police recovered a bloody hammer near the 2 bodies and found Mark's .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, a yellow mug, and a pack of cigarettes on the same dining table. They also noticed that Harrington's car had been parked against traffic, facing the wrong direction. At the crime scene, Cox said Mark was very upset and very emotional, and that he repeatedly asked who the man he'd killed was. Cox avoided identifying Harrington and tried to calm Mark down. As police combed through the scene, Mark asked police if the intruder's name was Roger. Cox confirmed that it was. Mark was shocked and he said, "Oh my gosh, that's the man who's been harassing my wife this week," Cox said. Cox, who was familiar with Harrington after he'd lived in a trailer park owned by Cox, believed Harrington might have snapped. "I knew him as a very volatile type subject. He and his wife rented a trailer for me," Cox said. "Knowing what I knew about Mr. Harrington in the past, how quick he was to anger, I thought that very well he could have gone over there to try to get his job back. There's a hammer laying right there on the table. He picks it up and goes into a rage. Then the husband shoots the bad guy." Tragically, both victims succumbed to their injuries. After learning about Donna's previous run-in with Harrington and listening to Mark's version of events, the police closed the case within days, listing Roger Harrington as the culprit. Because once police examined the scene and listened to Mark's story, detectives concluded that he had acted in self-defense. The case was closed in about 48 hours, Weinhoff said. But Harrington's family insisted from the beginning that their son was harmless. He was no troublemaker. He was a good kid. He wouldn't even strike at anybody, his mother, Ellen Harrington, said. "I don't think he would hurt anybody, and I don't think he was crazy." So it seemed like Mark Winger was going to get away with murder. Donna's mother spoke to the media about the evening and the family received the news of her daughter's murder. "It was 4 in the morning and I said, 'Jenny, it's Mom. Something terrible has happened,' Sarah Jane Drescher said of her call to Levin. 'We sat there in my room just crying at this unimaginable loss,' Levin said. In the following months, Donna's mother and sister took turns traveling to Illinois to help take care of Bailey. 'I loved Mark because he loved Donna, and that's what was important to me,' Sarah Jane Drescher said. But I had to be very careful because I did not want to ruin my relationship with him because I did not want to ruin my relationship with the baby. I wanted to be a grandma and Bailey made me a grandma. Mark was now a single father raising his infant daughter on his own. Donna's family initially flew to Illinois to help out, but they couldn't stay and they suggested Mark hire a nanny. In January 1996, he met 23-year-old Rebecca Simic, who was searching for a nanny job in the area. Rebecca told reporters it just felt like Bailey was the one that really needed me the most. She had been through so much already at the age of 3 months. Rebecca was wonderful with Bailey, and even Donna's family agreed that she was like an angel sent to help Mark. While she felt a little uncomfortable in the house where 2 people had died violently, she was dedicated to giving Bailey a good childhood despite the trauma of losing her mother. I didn't want to like Rebecca, but it was hard not to like her, Levin said. Seeing her with Bailey, there was really nothing bad we could say about her. Meanwhile, Rebecca's role at Mark's home had begun to evolve. When you live with someone and you're taking care of a child together, it's very easy to kind of play house, Rebecca said later on. Rebecca told the media that she was blown away by what the infant had been through in such a short time. Mark made me feel like I was like an angel sent to him from God or Donna, and it was my purpose to make this family whole again, Rebecca said. She lost 2 mothers by the time she was 3 months old, and she was so smiley, Rebecca said. I wanted to get in there and say, I'm going to help and I'm going to make this little girl's life better. Mark helped Rebecca feel at ease in her new role. After a few months, the two found themselves sharing conversation and a glass of wine at the end of a long day. And then one thing led to another as their relationship turned intimate. Within the year, Rebecca was pregnant with Mark's child. The couple eloped in Hawaii in October 1996, just 14 months after Donna's death. I remember asking him how he could move on so quickly, Rebecca later recalled. And he explained to me that when you have a good marriage, it's natural for you to just want that again. Rebecca said Mark had told her he wasn't able to have, so she said she was very surprised when she found out she was pregnant with his child only months after moving in. Obviously, I wasn't careful. It was just kind of a shock, she said. Mark, on the other hand, was thrilled, Rebecca recalled. Felt like it was a victory to him, she said. Mark put pressure on me to marry him and have children with him. Rebecca said that Mark, who was Jewish when they met, even started going to church with her. She said he told her they could raise a family in a Christian home. I would be honored to be your husband and blessed if you were my wife, Mark wrote in a letter to Rebecca. March Rabbi Michael Datz asked him about his change in faith, and he said that Mark explained Judaism is just too difficult and unforgiving. Rabbi Datz didn't understand, asking, Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you need forgiveness for? He said Mark didn't respond. But then it seemed like Mark was trying almost a little too hard to leave the past behind. 16 months after his wife's death, Mark told Sarah Jane Drescher that he was going to sell the house where her daughter Donna had died and buy another one just outside of town. He and Rebecca had started a family of their own, and he started cutting ties with Donna's parents. I received a letter from Mark one day saying to me I could not be called Grandma, Sarah Jane Drescher said. I wrote him back and I begged him, please let her call me Grandma. And he said, I'm sorry. There's no way I am going to allow her to call you Grandma, and that's the way it is. Sarah said she mourned that loss for a long time. Bailey Simic, now 25, told reporters that her grandmother and grandfather, Ira Drescher, would send a birthday card to her every year. I always remember asking my mom, who's Sarah Jane and Ira? She said. My mom would always explain, like, those are Donna's parents, and they just want to let you know that, like, they love you and that they remember you. Eventually, Mark sold the house where Donna had died and moved with his new wife to the suburbs outside of Springfield. Things seemed great on the surface. They had 3 children together, and Rebecca raised Bailey as her daughter. Though chaotic, their life seemed almost perfect. Mark was a loving partner and a very involved father. That would all change quite soon. One day in early 1999, when Mark was feeling ill, Rebecca took him to the emergency room in the hospital where Donna had worked before her death. There, they saw Donna's best friend and co-worker, Diane Schultz. She seemed upset to see Mark, and Rebecca remembered that Diane had acted strangely when she first came on Bailey's nanny, as if she were anxious to stay involved in Bailey's life. After they returned home, Mark commented that that may not be the last they heard from Dee, and he was right. In February 1999, Dee dropped a bombshell on the police, revealing that she and Mark had been having an affair before Donna's death. She said that at one point, he'd remarked to her that things would be easier for them the day of the murders. The more they thought about what they'd once assumed was an open and shut case, the more questions they had. Why were there no signs of forced entry into the Winger home that August day? Why would Roger Harrington bring his cup of coffee and cigarettes into the house with him if he'd planned to attack Donna? And why would he use the Winger's hammer as a weapon when he had a tire iron and a knife in his car? At that point, investigators came upon 3 never-before-seen Polaroid photos taken the day of the murders. They'd been with the evidence collected in a civil suit Mark had filed against the transportation company that had employed Harrington. The position of the bodies in the photos showed that Mark's version of events were not possible. Mark Winger had stated that Roger Harrington was kneeling right next to Donna Winger's head, and he was beating her with a hammer, Weinhoft explained. He stated that he shot him and that the man fell backward so that his feet remained near Donna's head. In reality, the Polaroid photographs show the exact opposite. Blood spatter experts agreed. Cox later told the media, "I was ashamed of the way the investigation went. I heard Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim." It had become clear that Mark was the real murderer behind the scenes the whole time. Rebecca Simic was left to make sense of the tragedy. She had no idea what Mark was capable of, and afterward, she moved her 4 children out of Springfield to feel safer. While Mark had tried to keep Bailey away from Donna's to reporters about the horrific realization that Mark was a manipulative killer hiding behind the mask of a brilliant engineer and a kind, loving husband and father. In December 1999, more than 4 years after the murders, the Springfield State Journal-Register ran an article based on allegations in the civil lawsuit that Mark had arranged the murder himself and killed both his wife and Harrington. The allegations were based on a blood spatter expert hired by BART Transportation in the case after the arrest of their employee Harrington. Everything came to a head. It changed everything, Rebecca said of the article. I mean, it went from Mark as the hero who was defending his wife, this noble stand-up guy that every man wanted to pat on the back, to a manipulative, deviant murderer. As the detectives continued their reinvestigation, they learned that Harrington's roommate, Susan Collins, had initially told police that someone asked to meet with Harrington on the day of the murders, and that she had seen Harrington on the phone arranging that meeting. Inside Harrington's car, they found a note written on a bank deposit slip with Mark's name, his address, and the time to be there. Roger Harrington was not an intruder, but rather he was lured into that home by Mark Winger, Weinhoff said. Deanne Skelta's cooperation with police and evidence that raised questions about Mark's story prompted the voluntary dismissal of the civil suit against BART Transportation. "I didn't see it coming," Rebecca said. "I didn't know that this whole investigation was brewing. I never thought the whole time that they thought my husband was a diabolical murderer." A warrant was issued for Mark's arrest, and he was taken into custody while at work. "I had made plans to go to McDonald's Playlander," Becca recalled. "We were there and I got a phone call and it was Mark's secretary, and she told me that Mark had just been arrested. I was just sick, like my whole body kind of went numb, and I just couldn't believe it. I was shaking so badly, and I just remembered feeling so scared. I felt that I owed it to him and to my kids to just stand by him," she said. Hanson, Donna's sister, said she didn't feel relieved following Mark's arrest. "I still wanted to believe he was innocent," she said. "Here's this person that I know in handcuffs, and what's going to happen?" Bailey was just 6 years old at the time of Mark's arrest. She said no longer having her father home was scary. "I just remember everyone just trying to remain calm and kind of, at the time, being like, Dad's just going away for a while and that he'll be back soon," she said. But that was no longer possible. On August 23, 2001, Mark Winger was indicted for the murders of Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. At the trial in May 2002, a visibly shaky Deanne testified against Mark. The court granted her immunity in exchange for her testimony, though there was no evidence linking her to anything other than keeping Mark's terrible secret. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One of the key points the prosecution had to prove was that Harrington had gone to the house to meet with the Wingers, not to commit a murder. They presented the cigarettes and coffee mug that he'd brought inside, as well as the weapons he'd left in his car, and the note with Mark's name and address. Mark's attorney argued that Harrington was mentally ill, that he behaved erratically, and that these traits indicated he was capable of murder. When prosecutors presented the Polaroid showing the position of the bodies before they were removed from the scene, Mark's attorney argued throughout the trial that first responders could have moved the bodies. "It's our belief that Roger comes to the house. He's allowed into the home," now retired Detective Jim Graham said. "There were no signs of forced entry, and he was executed at that time." Hearing the gunshot, Donna Winger then comes from the bathroom to investigate. He then beats his wife to death with a hammer. Mark then calls 911. In the 911 call, someone can be heard moaning in the 911. In the 911 call, someone can be heard moaning in the background when Mark tells the operator he can hear his baby crying and hangs up. He had told the operator there was a bullet in Harrington's head. But when police arrived, Harrington had been shot twice. Diane also gave damning testimony at the trial, saying that Mark told her it would be easier if Donna just died. "I thought it was crazy talk," she said during her cross-examination. After a chance meeting years later, Diane testified that she confronted Mark in the hopes of gathering information and asked him how he lived with himself, and that he'd replied that he had found Jesus Christ and was forgiven. She said he warned her that if she ever said anything, they would both be in trouble. "I didn't think that anybody would believe her," Rebecca said. "I just thought if Mark truly did that, she would have come forward right away." Mark's defense argued that Diane was emotionally unstable and just a woman who had been scorned. Diane Schultz's testimony was able to demonstrate that in reality, Mark was obviously unhappy, unfaithful, and had specifically talked about wanting to kill his wife, Weinhold said. Schultz was granted immunity for her testimony, he added. There was no direct evidence that directly linked Diane to actively participating in this crime. In the end, she was such a valuable witness as it relates to presenting the motive. After a trial that lasted 3 weeks, the jury found Mark Winger guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Rebecca said she believed he would be going home with them. After the verdict, she said the words guilty rang through her head and that she wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. Sarah Jane Drescher and her daughters, Donna's sisters, were with her when they heard the verdict. "The 3 of us just embraced and cried," she said. And the story gets even more twisted, because 4 years later, Mark was also sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison when he tried to hire a hitman to kill Diane for testifying against him. He even attempted to put out a hit against a childhood friend who had refused to pay his bail. Helen Harrington was relieved and grateful that her son had been vindicated of Donna's murder. "We knew that Roger was innocent and it finally got proven," she said. "He was branded a murderer at the time, but then all this came to an end." The police also had to come to terms with the faulty initial investigation. "I was ashamed of the way the investigation went," Cox said. "I hurt Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim." The police department had too hastily closed the case and turned a blind eye to some red flags. "And to right such a wrong, it felt great," Bram added. But Rebecca said there wasn't any closure for her or her family. "When we lose someone, we gather. We have a funeral," Rebecca shared. "But when someone goes to prison, well, what do? You're just kind of left with this emptiness and this hole that you can't really have closure with that." "It wasn't just him being sentenced to life," she said. "We were sentenced to a life of a father in prison." Bailey Simic says she missed having her father around while growing up. "It was really hard being in school seeing all the other kids have their dads in that relationship," she said. "And now suddenly, I couldn't just go to my dad's room or have him pick us up from school or anything like that." Ben Simic was only a year old when his dad went to prison. "I can look at the pictures and look at myself and say, that kid has no idea. He was way too young to know anything that was going on," he said. Rebecca had to move out of Springfield with her kids, and the home that she'd bought with Mark was foreclosed. She had been a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, so she had no option but to file for bankruptcy. "I didn't have anything to give my kids. Everything had been taken away. All I had was love," she said. Rebecca never remarried as far as we know. She raised all 4 of the children on her own, and Bailey has since reunited with Donna's family. It was so incredible to see that there's this whole big family that loves me. And Sarah Jane still has my baby picture on her kitchen counter with all of her other grandkids, even though we've been gone for so long. She said, "We've been hurt a lot by the same person, but it didn't break us," Rebecca said. Although Sarah Jane Drescher says there will never be closure for the murder of her daughter, the family has worked together to set up Donna's Fund, which is a part of Women in Distress, an organization that works to provide shelter for women trying to escape abuse. "I think her legacy will live on through people that we help," Levin said, "and through the beautiful memories that we have of her." So what do you think of this crazy, twisted case of murder uncovered? Would Mark Winger still be walking scot-free today if his former lover, Diane Schultz, hadn't developed a guilty conscience? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe for more in-depth coverage of some of the most manipulative murders of all time. Wilderness. They booked their trip with Iron Horse Outfitters, a guiding and outfitting company. On September 22nd, the couple arrived in Idaho Falls and drove to Hamilton. There, they parted ways. Tom and his guide began their excursion, and Susan and the other guide brought the 4 horses back to the camp. This ridge would be the last place Tom Adams saw his wife. Tom and his guide returned to camp the following afternoon. When they arrived, Susan was not there. The camp's cook said that Susan had told him that morning that she was going to a nearby meadow to spend some time doing some bird watching, but had never returned. When she left the camp, Susan had only binoculars and a camera with her. Tom immediately began looking for Susan in the area surrounding the camp. When it began getting dark, he expanded the area he was searching. He finally found some of her tracks on a trail. He followed the footprints to a spot roughly 20 feet away from the meadow, where they abruptly stopped. The guides from the outfitting company helped search for Susan all throughout the night, and the following morning, one of them rode on horseback 25 miles to get help. The weather was a major obstacle in the search for Susan. 2 days after she went missing, snow began to fall, and the search had to be called off. After a week, the weather cleared up enough for the search to resume, but it only went on for another 3 days before more snow forced the efforts to be halted for the winter. Unable to search for Susan in the wilderness, authorities spent this time investigating the last people to see her. Tom, the cook, and at least one of the guides from the camp were all given polygraph examinations. They all passed. In 1991, a massive search was launched to try and find Susan's remains. Tom Adams worked for the governor of Texas, who helped get resources for the search. Helicopters, the National Guard, tracking dogs, and numerous volunteers were all a part of the effort. Members of the search teams covered acres and acres of territory, walking almost shoulder to shoulder in an effort to make sure they did not miss any potential clues. During the course of the search, some footprints were discovered, although they were not conclusively linked to Susan. The tracks appeared to be from someone who was injured, with their left foot angled out to an unusual degree, indicating that it was fractured or sprained. No other sign of Susan was found, either in 1991 or since. Arvin Nelson was a popular member of the community in Big Sur, California. The 55-year-old was a longtime server at the Big Sur River Inn. His sweet and outgoing personality made him known to almost all of the town's local residents. Arvin was also an avid outdoorsman who was very familiar with most of the terrain in the area. On August 6, 2014, he decided to begin a backpacking trip through an area he had not previously hiked. He had a friend drop him off at the China Camp trailhead in the Los Padres National Forest. He planned to spend a week hiking the eastern side of the Ventana Wilderness, passing through Sykes Hot Springs on his way back to Big Sur. The area was very remote, but Arvin packed enough food and equipment to help him survive in the wilderness for that extended period of time. Arvin made sure that people knew about his plans and that he expected to return home by August 14th. He left instructions with a friend to notify authorities if he did not arrive back in Big Sur when planned. August 14th came and went with no sign of Arvin. On August 16th, he was reported missing. The subsequent investigation discovered that the last known people to see Arvin were Jack English and his son Dennis. They had an isolated cabin in the Pine Valley area of the Ventana Wilderness. Arvin had approached their cabin on August 6th the day he entered the wilderness, having discovered the cabin by following the sound of Dennis playing guitar. The three of them struck up a conversation and spent the following 2 days playing music and hiking around the area. When Jack and Dennis left the area by helicopter on August 8th, Arvin told them that he was going to remain in the area until the morning of 10th, when he would continue on his planned hike. A massive search effort was launched by the local sheriff's department to look for Arvin. The National Guard, the U.S. Forest Service, the California Highway Patrol, and the Coast Guard all aided in the effort. 3 helicopters and 1 small airplane conducted an aerial search. Dozens of volunteers turned out each day for the ground search, and search and rescue teams from 4 different counties all helped look for Arvin. Typically, this kind of search would only be conducted for 5 to 7 days. However, since Arvin had the skills and the supplies needed to survive in the wilderness, the search continued on beyond this window, even without it producing any clues. The final ground search was conducted on the 9th day of the effort. The aerial search continued on for a few days before wrapping up. No sign of Arvin or his belongings has ever been found. Connie Johnson had decades of experience working in the wilderness. She had worked as a U.S. Forest Service wilderness ranger at the Moose Creek Ranger Station in the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forests. She had also been a member of the Selway Bitterroot Foundation, leading tours of the Idaho backcountry. Even at 76 years old, she maintained an active lifestyle in a remote area. In 2018, she was working as a camp cook for Ritchie Outfitters. The company's camp was in the Fog Mountain area near Big Rock in a remote part of the national forest that could only be reached on foot or by horseback. On October 2nd, a group of hunters left the camp to go out deeper into the wilderness to hunt. The following day, they were in contact with Connie over their radios. However, they could not make out what Connie was saying. When they arrived back at camp on October 5th, Connie and her beloved border collie Ace were gone. Several teams of tracking dogs were brought in to search for Connie, and the U.S. Air Force, the Idaho National Guard, and the Clearwater County Backcountry Rescue Team all contributed aircraft for the aerial search. Members of the search teams combed the area on foot and on horseback. None of these efforts located Connie or Ace, and the official search was eventually called off on October 14th. On October 23rd, an area pilot spotted a dog at the Moose Creek Ranger Station airstrip, 15 miles from where Connie was last seen. It was Ace. After he was fed, he was examined by a vet and found to be in good health. He had lost weight during the time he had been missing, but was otherwise perfectly fine. Once Ace was cared for, Connie's family worked with a non-profit search dog organization out of Montana to transport him back to the search area in hopes that he would lead them to Connie. The effort was unsuccessful. Connie's disappearance remains unsolved. 28-year-old David Morrison was originally from Fresno, California, but was living in San Francisco and working as a chef there in 1998. That Memorial Day weekend, David and a group of his friends decided to visit Yosemite National Park. On the morning of Memorial Day, May 25th, David decided to hike up to Yosemite's famous Half Dome. He left Cary Village in Little Yosemite Valley, where the group had been staying around 7:15 a.m., and told his girlfriend that he would be back later in the afternoon. David has not been seen since. David was an experienced hiker, but he had essentially no equipment with him on this particular excursion, carrying only a belt bag around his waist. He left for his hike wearing layers, but the thickest of them was a sweatshirt, which would have provided little protection against the snow that fell that night. Another 4 inches of snow would fall later in the week. The weather complicated the search effort for David, both because it made hiking difficult for the search teams and because the snow covered up potential clues like tracks that could have led to David, who was presumed to be lost and most likely injured. Resources were also diverted away from the search for David the day after he was last seen when 2 trapped climbers needed to be rescued. The search effort included David's family, numerous volunteers, teams of search dogs, and a helicopter. Despite all of this effort, David and his belongings were not found. 3 days after David was last seen, members of the search team found 6 tracks. The tread impressions in them matched the kind that would be left by the type of shoes David had been wearing. It could not be confirmed that the tracks belonged to David, and they did not help locate him. The full-scale search ended the Friday after David went missing. The search then entered a limited technical mode, with only a dozen trained climbers and 24 search dogs continuing to search for David. David's family has continued to return to Yosemite every year to look for him and to visit the small memorial his mother placed near Half Dome. His family hopes that even after more than 20 years, they will be able to find David's body and resolution to his disappearance. 53-year-old Teresa Schmidt lived in Avon, Indiana, where she worked as a social worker. In September of 2002, she traveled to Colorado with her husband. He was an anesthesiologist and was attending a medical conference there. The couple was staying at the Lost Valley Guest Ranch during their trip. On September 6th, Teresa decided to go for a hike. She left her room at the ranch with 2 water bottles and a jacket in her backpack. She was seen hiking along a trail that led to an overlook on the east side of the ranch's property around 3 p.m. that afternoon. She was never seen again after that. Teresa was an experienced hiker and had stayed at the ranch in the past, so she was familiar with the area. However, a recent forest fire had dramatically changed the area's landscape, so Teresa may not have been able to rely on visual clues to guide her back to her room like she may have expected to. Teresa's husband reported her missing at 7 p.m., the day she was last seen, when she did not meet him back in their room. But the search for her was not started until 2 a.m. on September 7th. The search was extensive, however. More than 70 volunteers helped search for Teresa, and authorities used tracking dogs and helicopters. Teresa's husband used a motorcycle to cover a larger area during his own several-day search. The only clues found in Teresa's disappearance were 2 sets of footprints, one on each side of nearby Chessman Overlook believed to belong to her. Neither she nor any of her belongings have ever been found. Teresa's family, acknowledging that she most likely succumbed to the elements while lost in the wilderness, held a memorial service for her after she went missing. However, her case remains unsolved, and her family is still waiting to give her a proper burial. In the quiet, seemingly mundane corners of life often lie the most extraordinary and harrowing tales. Velma Barfield's story reshaped the narrative of crime and punishment in the United States, challenging our understanding of morality and human behavior. Known infamously as the Death Row Grandma, Velma became the first woman executed by lethal injection in the United States, the first woman put to death after the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976, and the first woman executed since 1962. But how did a wife, mother, and grandmother, once cherished and beloved by her community, become one of the most infamous figures in criminal history? Born during the economic turmoil of the Great Depression, Velma Margie Barfield entered the world on October 29, 1932, in Eastover, North Carolina. Raised near Fayetteville as the second of 9 children, Velma grew up in a household defined by relentless poverty. Life revolved around the family's small tobacco and cotton farm, where survival was dictated by the unpredictable cycles of nature. Her father, Murphy Bullard, was a man beaten down by the harsh realities of rural farming. His temper, as volatile as the storms that threatened their livelihood, cast a shadow over their household. Velma later alleged that her father was physically and sexually abusive toward her and her sisters, though other relatives refuted these claims. Her mother, Lily Bullard, endured the bulk of her husband's frustrations, navigating a marriage devoid of tenderness or respite. In such an environment, love became a luxury the Bullard children could rarely afford. As Velma grew older, she became acutely aware of the economic disparities between her family and her peers, fueling feelings of inadequacy and resentment. That's when her first criminal activity started. She initially took small amounts of cash from her father to buy little things that she saw her classmates enjoying. Her petty thefts escalated to taking $80 from an elderly neighbor. When her father discovered that, he beat her severely and Velma stopped stealing for the remainder of her childhood. Raised in a Christian household, young Velma found solace in the pages of her Bible, clinging to faith in the turmoil of her home life. This early introduction to religion was a constant amidst chaos. Yet, as she transitioned to adolescence, the psychological scars left by her upbringing would shape the woman she would later become. The world around was convulsed by World War II. The war, though distant, exacerbated the hardships faced by her family and deepened the fractures within. Velma, like many of her generation, was forced to grow up quickly. Her dreams and aspirations were often overshadowed by depressing needs of survival and duty to family. Yet it was during this time that her resilience and tenacity began to shine through, qualities that would define her in both commendable and tragic ways. As Velma stepped into early adulthood, her desire for a life beyond the confines of her home grew stronger. She dreamed of escape. At the age of 17, she dropped out of school. The search for love and stability led Velma into the arms of Thomas Burke, a union that promised freedom, but instead brought new hardships. By 19, she had 2 children, a son, Ron, and a daughter, Kim. The family lived happily in Parkton, North Carolina for over 15 years. Velma's life with Thomas seemed a hard-earned escape from the poverty and violence of her childhood. Everything changed in 1965 when Thomas got into a serious car crash and suffered head injuries. To cope with the intense pain and headaches caused by his injuries, he became a heavy drinker and drug user. His struggle with alcohol mirrored the demons of Velma's father, reigniting the traumas of her past. The cycle of abuse and neglect she vowed never to repeat began to encroach upon her own family. It was during these turbulent years that Velma's resilience was put to the ultimate test. The pressures of an unhappy marriage, the responsibilities of motherhood, and the patterns of her past weighed heavily on her soul. Velma started a job at a textile factory but soon had to quit due to health problems. She underwent an urgent hysterectomy, which left her feeling insecure about her femininity. After the surgery, she suffered from debilitating back pain and turned to prescription drugs. What began as a means to cope soon spiraled into addiction that eroded her judgment and set the stage for the tragedies to come. Her journey was not a plunge, but a gradual descent, each step marked by an increasing desperation to maintain the illusion of control. On April 4, 1969, Velma had a fierce argument with her husband. Later that day, when she and the children were away, the house caught fire. Thomas, who remained inside, died from smoke inhalation, and the house was burned to the ground. Velma and the kids moved in with her parents. A few months after her husband's death, Velma started dating a widower, Jennings Barfield. They married in August 1970. One day, the couple had an argument, after which Jennings became mysteriously ill. On March 21, 1971, he died of a heart attack. Velma moved into her parents' home again. Soon after that, her father died of lung cancer. In the summer of 1974, her mother suffered severe stomach pain and was taken to the hospital. As she got better, she returned home. In August 1974, a man Velma was dating died in a car accident. On December 30th the same year, her mother was taken to the hospital again with similar symptoms of a severe stomach illness. Doctors couldn't help her this time, nor could they diagnose her illness, and she died after 2 hours. No autopsy was performed. As mysterious deaths around Velma continued, her son Ronnie Burke said, "It's the saddest thing, but it seems like everybody my mother ever gets close to dies. How could the good Lord allow this to happen to a faithful Christian like Velma Barfield?" The financial strain of her addiction led to another unethical decision, forging checks to sustain her growing needs. But deceit has its price, and the trust within the community began to fray. Velma found herself trapped in a web of her own making. In 1975, she was convicted of 7 counts of writing bad checks and sentenced to 6 months in prison. However, she was released after serving 3 months. Upon her release in 1976, Velma took a job as a caretaker for the elderly. Initially, she worked for 94-year-old Montgomery Edwards and his 84-year-old wife, Dolly, in Lumberton, North Carolina. Montgomery fell ill and died on January 29, 1977. A few weeks later, in February, Dolly developed symptoms of a stomach illness similar to those of Velma's mother and died on March 1st. Velma then started looking after 76-year-old Record Lee, who had broken her leg. On June 4, 1977, Lee's husband, John Henry, began to suffer severe pains in his stomach and chest. Doctors diagnosed his condition as a severe stomach virus. He died later that month. Later in 1977, Velma moved in with her boyfriend Roland Stewart Taylor, a relative of Dolly Edwards. He was a widower and tobacco farmer. One day, they were attending a Pentecostal revival meeting in Cumberland County. Suddenly, Stewart complained of severe stomach pain. He was taken to the hospital where he died after a few days. The search for truth begins in the quietest of ways. A question, a doubt, a pressing need for answers. Suspicion grew in the hearts of those who had watched Stewart's health decline under mysterious circumstances. It was their persistence that first brought the authorities to Velma's doorstep, initiating a chain of events that would lead to shocking revelations. An autopsy was ordered. The investigation into Stewart Taylor's death was methodical. Each test, each interview, each piece of evidence added another layer of suspicion around Velma. In the world of criminal investigations, breakthroughs often come with a faint clue, a moment of intuition, a connection previously unseen for the team pursuing justice for Stewart Taylor and the other victims. It came in the form of forensic evidence. Arsenic became the linchpin in unraveling the mystery, traces of which were found in Stewart's system. Before the autopsy results were declared, Lumberton police received an anonymous phone call reportedly from Velma's sister who said that Velma had poisoned Taylor and others. Subsequently, Velma was arrested on charges of murdering Stewart Taylor. After her arrest, the body of Jennings Barfield was exhumed, and traces of arsenic were found. The unraveling of Velma's carefully constructed lies began. The art of interrogation is delicate, a push and pull between investigator and suspect, each question a probe into the darkest corners of the human heart. For Velma, the questions posed by her interrogators mirrored the ones she had long avoided within herself. It was in this room, under the weight of evidence and the scrutiny of the law, that the wall she had built to separate her actions from her conscience could no longer hold as the truth clawed its way to the surface. In search of solace, Velma turned to a spiritual advisor. It was in this desperate hope for redemption that she found the strength to confront her past. For her, the path to confession was a journey back to her soul. With a voice tinged with regret, Velma began to speak. A torrent of truths long dammed by fear, shame, and denial flowed forth. Her confession became a source of deep lasting pain for her own family who were unwittingly caught in her web of deceit. The woman they loved and the horrible crimes she committed were now inseparably linked, challenging their notions of forgiveness and the very foundations of their understanding of right and wrong. She confessed to poisoning Montgomery and Dolly Edwards, John Henry Lee, her mother, Lillian, and her boyfriend, Stewart Taylor. Exposure, Velma took a step that irrevocably altered the course of her life. The path from one crime to another can often be a slippery slope. She found herself repeating the unthinkable. Every time, Velma went to her victims' funerals and seemed to sincerely mourn their loss. The burden of her secret pushed her further into isolation. Yet the resilient human psyche, adept at self-preservation, often takes refuge churchgoer, a seemingly caring nurse, and a loving family member. But her moral compass, once guided by faith, now veered into a realm of denial, caught in a constant struggle between the remnants of her conscience and the overwhelming desire to escape the consequences of her actions. She was forging checks on her boyfriend, Stewart Taylor's account. Presumably, he discovered that. So she mixed an arsenic-based rat poison into his beer and tea, determined to maintain her secret at any cost. At the trial, Velma's defense pleaded insanity, but this was not accepted. She appeared cold and uncaring. She laughed at the prosecutor and even gave the district attorney a round of applause after his closing speech. The prosecution painted a picture of Velma not as the church-going grandmother she purported to be, but as a calculating murderer driven by darkness. She was the architect of her own fate, and her actions deserved the utmost penalty. The defense in turn sought to humanize her, portraying her not as a monster, but as a troubled soul ensnared by addiction, abuse, and circumstances beyond her control, highlighting her mental health struggles as a mitigating factor in her crimes. In the world of law and order, the truth is often more complex than it appears, inseparable from human emotions. Although she eventually confessed to 6 murders, she was convicted only of the first-degree murder of Stuart Taylor in December 1978. The trial jury found aggravating circumstances and sentenced her to death. For the victims' families, the verdict was an acknowledgement of their irreplaceable loss. A designated holding area for female death row prisoners did not exist at the time, and Velma was the only female death row inmate in North Carolina. So she was imprisoned at Central Prison in Raleigh in an area for escape-prone prisoners and prisoners with mental illnesses. Subsequently, a unit for female death row inmates was established at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. While on death row, Velma was off the drugs and expressed remorse for the years that the pills had blurred her judgment and destroyed her moral compass. In the solitude of her cell, she began the arduous process of confronting her past. The nights were long. The faces of her victims haunted her dreams, and the silence served as a backdrop for her thoughts and regrets. It was during these moments of reflection that Velma faced the full magnitude of her actions, the lives she had taken, and the pain she had caused. Her conversations with the prison chaplain were not just about seeking forgiveness from a higher power, but about understanding the nature of atonement and the painstaking process of forgiving oneself. In jail, Velma confessed that she had never been a true Christian. Her Christianity had been a matter of form and gesture. Then finally, while waiting for her trial, she genuinely opened her heart to Jesus and received forgiveness and salvation. She wrote in her autobiography, "All my life I was weighted down by my sins because I couldn't do better. It never occurred to me that Jesus really did pay the price, that Jesus alone bore the extreme punishment, death for my sins, not just for my good neighbors. And even more glorious, Jesus is willing to be my friend even now. I can talk to him and he will listen." She became a devout Christian and spent her 6 final years ministering to other inmates. Velma, in her own way, became a source of support to them. Her involvement in spiritual activities offered her a sense of community and belonging that had eluded her for much of her life. Her extensive participation in the Christian community led to a campaign to have her sentence commuted from death to life imprisonment. She wrote letters to Governor Jim Hunt telling him that her born-again Christian faith should be considered as a mitigating factor. She received support from many Christians across the United States, including evangelists Billy and Ruth Graham. Ruth kept in touch with Velma by mail. Her victims' families, however, considered Velma's conversion a fraud and a ploy to save her life. To them, she was a woman who had killed their loved ones. Velma remained a loving mother and a caring grandmother. She enjoyed family visits every weekend and spent time with her children and grandchildren. Her new attorney, Richard Burr, said about her, "The person I saw was kind, sensitive, and loving. There was no hidden agenda with Velma. Whenever you were with her, she was who she was. From what I understand, that's how she lived her life in prison. So from the very beginning, I believed that when she committed those crimes, it was not the Velma Barfield mentally and emotionally that I was seeing and getting to know." Burr believed that Velma's pretrial evaluations were inadequate, so he turned to psychiatrist Selwyn Rose. Dr. Rose evaluated Velma in 1980 and testified in the state court. He said that she suffered from 3 disorders, a multiple prescription drug abuse disorder, an underlying personality disorder, and depression. However, Dr. Rose never felt as if he had put together a complete picture of Velma. As Burr had no license to practice in North Carolina, he now assisted Velma's new lawyer, Jimmy Little. As time was running out, Velma's son Ronnie Burke asked her if she had killed his father. She replied, "I'm sure I probably did." She couldn't remember clearly, but she believed that she had left a cigarette or a match in the bed and then closed the door, leaving her drunk husband to sleep in their burning house. She also admitted to the pastor who helped her right woman on death row that she had murdered Jennings Barfield. Velma said she was glad that this was finally over because she was afraid that she was going to poison her grandchildren. She didn't know why she did it, but she did it, and it was not something she could stop. North Carolina's governor refused Velma's request for clemency and said that her victims had been literally tortured to death. Additionally, an appeal was made based on testimony from a psychiatry professor who asserted that she suffered from dissociative identity disorder. Professor Dorothy Lewis, professor of psychiatry at New York University School of Medicine and an expert in violent behavior, picked up patterns of manic episodes in Velma's earlier life associated with the development of a manic depressive disorder. She said she had talked to Velma's other personality, Billy, who told her Velma had been a victim of sexual abuse and that he, Billy, had killed her abusers. The judge responded to this by saying one of them did it. I don't care which one. Velma's final appeal was filed on October 30th, 1984 in the North Carolina Supreme Court based on her being incompetent at her original trial due to her drug addiction. This appeal was denied in federal court. She told her attorney, Jimmy Little, to drop all appeals the day before she was executed, explaining that she wanted to die with as much dignity as the state of North Carolina will allow. Her last hours were spent in reflection and prayer, seeking comfort in her faith. As she was preparing for death, the famous pastor Billy Graham told her over the phone, Velma, in a way I envy you because you're going to get to heaven before I do. Velma was executed on November 2nd, 1984 at Central Prison in Raleigh. She released a statement before her execution. I want to say that I am sorry for all the hurt that I have caused. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years. I want to thank my family for standing with me through all this, and my attorneys and all the support to me, everybody, the people with the prison department. I appreciate everything, their kindness, and everything that they have shown me during these 6 years. As her last meal, she chose a bag of cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola. She received final visits from her family members and friends. She wasn't scared and told one of them, "When I go into that gas chamber at 2 a.m., it's my gateway to heaven." She was wearing pink pajamas for the execution. A stethoscope and heart monitor were taped to her chest. The wheeled gurney was brought to her cell, and she was fastened to it with straps across her body and legs. Then she was wheeled into the execution chamber shortly before 2 a.m. Crowds of pro- and anti-death penalty demonstrators gathered outside the prison. Some of the protesters accused Governor Hunt of refusing to show mercy and compassion, arguing that she could lead a life of value behind bars and help other prisoners. Richard Burr said politics and death have been mixed up in this case. Inmates were banging rhythmically on the windows of their cells waiting for the execution. About 80 people who were in favor of capital punishment cheered and applauded. The execution was carried out by 3 volunteers. One of the intravenous lines was a dummy so that none of the volunteers knew which of them actually administered the lethal dose. Velma was declared dead at 2:15 a.m., 15 minutes after being administered the injection of procuronium bromide. Observers at the execution reported that she passed away peacefully with no apparent suffering or pain. About 300 opponents of the death penalty stood in silent vigil, carrying candles that were extinguished as the moment of the execution passed. At 2:25 a.m., Velma's body was taken to a medical school by an ambulance. She had requested that her organs be used for transplantation. She was buried in a small North Carolina cemetery near her first husband, Thomas Burke. She was 52 years old. Singer-songwriter Jonathan Byrd, the grandson of Jennings Barfield and his first wife, wrote a song about Velma. Carol Ann Smith, born Opal Mary Carey, came into the world in Indianapolis, Indiana. By 1944, the 51-year-old widow was residing in a duplex at 10 East 21st Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She had moved there in early 1935, shortly after her husband's death. Living with her in the duplex were 2 younger women whom Carol Ann referred to as her roommates to her neighbors, 31-year-old Virginia Evans and 30-year-old Willetta Horner. Carol Ann and Virginia first crossed paths in 1937 at a Christian Science bookstore. Their friendly conversations quickly blossomed into a close friendship, leading Virginia to move in with Carol Ann not long afterward. A year later, Carol Ann met Willetta, whom she called Lita, at a grocery store. Initially, their relationship was casual, but Lita eventually opened up about her troubled childhood. Moved by her story, Carol Ann invited Lita to move into the duplex as well. In 1944, as World War II raged on, everyday items like sugar and gasoline were rationed by the U.S. government. These shortages, caused by disrupted trade routes and the military's immense demand for supplies, required civilians to use government-issued ration stamps to purchase limited amounts of such items. To secure more supplies, Carol and Smith applied for 7 ration books, claiming they were for her children and dependents. In reality, Carol had no living children, as none of her children had survived more than a few days after birth. 2 of the ration books were in the names of her 2 roommates. However, 3 of the books were issued to individuals who were deceased Carol's late husband, father, and maid. Another one of the books was issued to Carol's 11-year-old nephew, Bobby, who Carol claimed was living with her. The final ration book was issued in the name of Carol's bulldog, Bon Bon. The numerous ration books Carol acquired raised suspicion with the ration board, who asked the Tulsa Police Department to investigate her for fraud. As a part of their investigation, police began interviewing Carolyn's neighbors, almost all of whom had bizarre tales to tell about 10 East 21st Street and its inhabitants. The neighbors reported hearing bizarre growls and screams coming from the home, and a witness saw the 3 women who lived there burying something behind the house at midnight one night. Based on these statements, the police were able to obtain a warrant to search the home. As a part of their search, police excavated the backyard of the property. The objects that witnesses had seen being buried turned out to be coffins. Inside were the remains of 2 dogs, one of which was Bon Bon the bulldog. Inside the house, police discovered a scene that would inspire a local media frenzy. They found Carol and Smith's 2 roommates, barefoot, cold, dirty, and hungry. Their clothes were dirty because they were given barely enough water to drink and had none left over for laundry. Police found their sleeping quarters in the unheated basement. Their beds were made out of crates, and they had only threadbare clothing. A repairman eventually came forward to confirm that at least one of the women had lived like this for some time. When he had come to work on the furnace in the middle of the winter, one of the 2 women, not specified in any of the accounts, was wandering around the basement with no shoes and inadequate clothing for the weather. When he told her he needed to extinguish the pilot light to work on the furnace, she informed him that the small flame was the only source of heat she had. Virginia and Willetta's living conditions were in stark contrast to Carol Ann's. While they lived in cold and filth in the basement, without even bare necessities, she lived a luxurious life in the rest of the house. Willetta and Virginia cooked Carol Ann's meals and cleaned the home for her. She had enough makeup and perfume to stock a drugstore, according to newspaper reports at the time. She owned a $250 silver set and drove a Packard. When police searched the home, she had 18 pairs of gloves, 26 hats, and over 200 pairs of shoes. Many of the items Carol had in excess in her home were rationed at the time, and it is unclear how she amassed such a large number of them, even with her extra ration books. Both Virginia and Willetta had jobs outside of the home, but they always returned to the home and the deplorable living conditions they were provided with there after work. They also turned over every cent of the money they made to Carol Ann. According to both of the young women, they never tried to escape because of a hex Carol Ann had placed on them. The women claimed that they had been hypnotized by Carol Ann and gave accounts of being verbally abused and manipulated by occult means. They were alienated from their own families and pitted against one another. Carol Ann concocted false stories about each of the girls and was able to convince them that they were true and that she could expose their depravity. Carol Ann pieced together her own religion from occult practices and Christian beliefs and had Virginia and Willetta convinced that they would burn in hell if they did not do everything she, the one person who could save them from damnation, told them to do. Having been convinced that they would be rewarded in heaven for obeying Carol and Smith, Virginia and Willetta lived in the basement and worked as virtual slaves in the house for years. They both also behaved aggressively against their neighbors at Carol Ann's behest. A previous resident of the other half of the duplex reported that Virginia had once lured him to a window on Carol Ann's side of the duplex and thrown boiling water on him. Other prior tenants of the duplex claimed that Willetta would regularly instigate fights with them. Willetta and Virginia confirmed these accounts after being found by police, but insisted that they only behaved this way because Carolyn had ordered them to. The reports of hexes, abuse, blackmail, and the occult coming out of 10 East 21st Street quickly put it at the center of a media circus. The Tulsa Tribune dubbed Carol Ann as she's Bengali, The house became known as the Hex House, and Carol and was often referred to as the basement were the most sensational part of the story in the eyes of the media. There was plenty more to the concerning case of Carol and Smith. In Virginia and Willetta's salaries, Carol and supported her lifestyle largely through fraud. She convinced Virginia's father, a wealthy businessman in Stroud, Oklahoma, that his daughter was seriously ill and required private nursing services to save her life. He sent her more than $17,000 for his daughter's care that went instead to Carol Ann's extravagant spending. Carol Ann's other attempts to defraud appear to be mainly centered around insurance fraud. Virginia and Willetta may not have been the first victims of what would become known as the Hex House. In February of 1935, a woman ran out of Carol Ann's side of 10 East 21st Street screaming. She ran out into the street and was hit by a car. She was taken to a hospital but passed away due to her injuries a week later. Carol and Smith told authorities that the woman was Beulah Walker, a 45-year-old widow who worked as a nurse in Carol Ann's home. Police were never able to get in contact with anyone from Beulah's family, and Carol Ann insisted on handling her funeral arrangements. Carol Ann had a large insurance policy on Beulah's life. She also later told the insurance company that Beulah had been a wealthy aunt of hers, which earned her an additional payout. The insurance company was suspicious, however, and began investigating Carol Ann's policy. They discovered that Beulah Walker had in fact been a poorly paid servant in the house and canceled the policy. Just 1 month before police found Virginia and Willetta in the basement of the Hex House, Carol Ann had taken out large life insurance policies on both of the young women. There were a number of other suspicious deaths that came to people close to Carol and, although not all of them resulted in a financial gain for her. Carol Ann had first moved into 10 East 21st Street at the beginning of 1935, not long before the death of Beulah Smith and not long after the death of Carol Ann's husband, Fay H. Smith. Fay had apparently taken his own life using a shotgun triggered with a twig in 1934. While Fay had recently lost his job, like many others during the Great Depression, none of his friends or previous co-workers believed he would have taken this course of action even though Carol Ann had apparently extensively discussed it as an option with him shortly before his death. Carol Ann received a $31,000 payout from the insurance policy on her husband's life. That amount is equivalent to more than $450,000 today. In January of 1935, the managers of the apartment building where Carol Ann had lived with her husband raised her rent to force her out because they did not care for her. The rent hike worked and she moved into 10 East 21st Street. The criminal investigator assigned to investigate Fay Smith's death died shortly after taking on the case. Carol Ann's sister had also recently passed away. The driver, who had struck and killed Beulah Walker, Captain Rains, died suddenly just a short time after the accident. He had refused to ever say a word about the accident to anyone, including his family. When Carol Ann moved into the duplex in January of 1935, she wanted her father to move in with her from his home in St. Louis because, she said, it was too large for her to live alone in. She went to St. Louis several times to help him prepare to relocate. However, her father died before his move to Tulsa, providing Carol Ann with another massive insurance payout. The officiant, who had presided over all of the funerals Carol Ann had to organize, also passed away around this time. The next suspicious death would not take place for several years. Mary Horner, Willetta's mother, suddenly passed away shortly after arriving in Tulsa to look for her daughter. While circumstances potentially tie Carol Ann to several serious crimes, she was only ever tried for relatively minor ones. In October of 1944, she was tried for inducing Virginia and Willetta to testify falsely against a neighbor. After a 3-day trial, she was found guilty and sentenced to a year in prison. A month later, she pled guilty to federal charges of perjury, mail fraud, obtaining money under false pretenses, and using false statements to obtain a ration book for her bulldog, Bon Bon. After serving her sentence, Carol Ann left Oklahoma. Nothing is known about what became of her, and it has been speculated that she may have changed her identity. The duplex that contained the Hex House was torn down in 1975, and the basement where Virginia and Lita were held was filled in with dirt. Eventually, a parking lot was built on the site where the home once stood. The parking lot has since been abandoned. The set of stairs that Beulah Walker ran down just before being hit by a car are still on 21st Street. Reported incidents of cars starting up on their own, even without keys in the ignition while parked in the lot where the Hex house once stood, kept alive the story of the two bewitched women held as slaves in the home and the mystique around it for many years. Today, Tulsans are reminded of the sensational tale that once gripped their city by an area haunted house that hosts an attraction inspired by the story of Carol and Smith and the events that transpired at 10 East 21st Street. Located in Lee County, Auburn is the largest city in eastern Alabama and the fastest-growing metropolitan area in the state. It ranks as the 19th fastest-growing metro area in the United States since 1990. Unofficially nicknamed the loveliest village on the plains, Auburn is a blend of cultures, renowned for its southern hospitality. This historic college town is home to Auburn University, one of the nation's most well-known public universities. Today's story centers on Lori Slosinski, a former student of this esteemed institution. Lori Ann Slosinski was born on September 21, 1981, to Casey and Arlene Slosinski. With her blonde hair and blue eyes, Lori was adored by her parents and her older brother, Paul. Originally from New York State, the family relocated to rural Alabama near Auburn when Lori was 13 years old. Growing up in the countryside surrounded by animals, Lori developed a deep love for them. Friends often described her as stunningly beautiful and kind-hearted. Lori enjoyed spending time with friends, watching movies, riding her bike, and playing video games. Despite her active social life, she was highly dedicated to her studies, and her family supported her academic pursuits wholeheartedly. After graduating high school, Lori enrolled at Auburn University, where she majored in psychology with a minor in criminology. To provide her with a comfortable living arrangement, her parents bought her a mobile home in a well-kept trailer park favored by students. There, Lori lived alone with her beloved Yorkshire Terrier, Peanut. Her close bond with her family remained intact, with her mother calling every day to check up on her. In 2005, she graduated with honors from Auburn University. Soon after graduation, she took up a job in the East Alabama Mental Health Center while still living in the trailer park. She also made plans to go for her master's degree in psychology in the near future. Lori's family was proud of her achievements, unaware of any foreshadowing of evil that was looming over her head. On June 10, 2006, 24-year-old Lori had made plans for a girls' night at her best friend Lindsey Braun's house. They had plans to have a few drinks and watch a movie. Lori first met Lindsey in their junior year at Auburn University. Already impressed by Lori's sweet, charming, and outgoing personality, the two girls became friends. The bond only grew stronger when they had both got a job at the same mental health facility after completing graduation. Around 6:30 p.m. on June 10th, Lori called Lindsey saying that she had to stop at the store and then she'd head over to her house for the movie night. Unfortunately, she would never make it there. Lindsey grew worried when she did not hear from Lori again that night or the following day. She called Lori several times and left messages on her home answering machine, but she never heard back from her. When Lori did not show up at her workplace on Monday, June 12th, Lindsey's concerns skyrocketed. It was very unusual for Lori to miss work and not inform anyone. After another no-show at work on the following Tuesday, June 13th, Lindsey, along with another coworker, went to Lori's house to check on her. When they reached the trailer home, Lindsey could not find Lori anywhere. Upon entering, she found the door unlocked and the AC on, which was pretty surprising. She also observed that Lori's dog, Peanut, was inside his crate. He looked well-nourished and happy, as if someone was taking care of him. Amazingly, his crate was unsoiled, even though Lori had been missing for several days at that point. Lindsey felt that something was amiss, as it was unlike Lori to leave her beloved pet alone unattended. Lindsey remembered that Lori had placed 3 rugs on her kitchen floor as the dog refused to walk on the tile. These rugs were missing, along with the outside trash can when Lindsey entered. Later that same day, June 13, 2006, Lori's mother Arlene got a call from her workplace regarding Lori missing work 2 days in a row. Arlene immediately tried to call her but could not get a hold of her. Afraid for her daughter's well-being, Arlene immediately left for Auburn after alerting her husband Casey of their daughter's disappearance. Upon arrival, she entered Lori's trailer and found a disturbing scene. She noticed the door was slightly ajar and her bed was perfectly made. But there was and the phone cord for her landline were all gone. Alarm bells rang as Arlene instantly realized something was horribly wrong. She officially reported her daughter missing while still hoping that she would show up eventually. As the initial investigation was launched and police scanned through Lori's trailer home, they could not find any significant evidence that could link a possible suspect. However, they noticed there were obvious signs of a struggle and scuff marks on the wall. There was semen discovered on Lori's bedsheet and traces of blood were also found on the doorknob. A coat hanger and a single golden hoop earring were also found at the scene. Police would soon recover surveillance footage on June 10, 2006 showing Lori stopping at an Alabama Walmart. That was the last known sighting of Lori and nobody had any clue what happened to her after that. A tip would, however, soon come in later that afternoon. Eileen got a phone call from one of Lori's friends, 25-year-old Daryl Richard Ennis, who was commonly referred to as Rick. Rick told Arlene that he met Lori the day she went missing and he thought she might have gone off to make a drug deal. Lori had met Rick Ennis at a bowling alley where he worked. She often hung out there when she was still a student. Arlene knew him because Lori invited him to spend Christmas with Lori's family in 2005. Lori felt bad from having no family of his own. However, Arlene could not believe what Ennis was claiming despite her daughter's close friendship with him. She did not believe that Lori would ever be involved in drug dealing. She thought that he was simply lying through his teeth, but didn't have any clue as to why. Police were also given this information by Ennis himself. Yet before they could act on it, a terrifying discovery was made. On June 14, 2006, 4 days after Lori's disappearance, at approximately 4:40 a.m., her car was found fully ablaze on an impasse near the bowling alley where Rick had previously been employed. From that point on, the investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a possible homicide. According to investigators, the fire destroyed any traces of evidence that would have possibly been found inside the car. However, Lori was not inside the vehicle at the time it was burnt. A hand-rolled cigarette was on the ground near the car. A gas can was also found close by in the woods. The incident horrified Lori's family, and they were almost certain now that something very bad had happened to her. Investigating the information Ennis provided to Arlene was their only clue at the time. When Ennis was brought in for questioning, he repeated the same story he told Arlene, only adding more details this time. Ennis claimed that he and Lori grew marijuana together. According to him, Lori might have gone off to sell her share of the weed they grew together. He also added that Lori could have been dealing with shady people. Police raided Lori's trailer. However, even after a thorough search, the police were unable to find any evidence of Lori dealing drugs. During the interview, investigators also took notice several scratches on Rick's hands and arms, which he claimed came from his dog. More concerning things came to light when investigators talked to Lindsay. As per Lindsay's account, she had heard Rick Ennis speaking in the background when she and Lori last spoke on the phone the day she vanished. Since Ennis was known to be a friend of Lori, Lindsay did not think much of it at the time. Lindsay claimed that when she texted Rick inquiring about Lori's whereabouts, he said that she was fine when he left her. Lindsay also informed the investigators that before her disappearance, Lori had told her that Rick had written a love letter to her. His feelings for her were not reciprocated. Lindsay also claimed that Lori told her that she was not romantically attracted to Rick and was going to have a conversation about it with him. Later, investigators found out that Ennis told her friends about his letter and Lori's rejection. When police re-interviewed him to confront him with the new information they collected from Lindsay, he admitted meeting her hours before her disappearance, but insisted that Lori was perfectly fine and was preparing to go to the store when he left her house. However, investigators discovered several inconsistencies in his statement. Investigators began focusing on Rick Ennis as their prime suspect. Their suspicion only grew stronger after searching his car. Investigators found several items of interest, including a knife, some cleaning supplies, and handcuffs. To gather more evidence, investigators began digging through his past, but they were not expecting the twists they were going to be met with. Looking through the unimaginably dark past of Rick Ennis, investigators discovered that he had actually murdered his mother and stepfather when he was only 12 years of age. On March 3, 1993, just 10 months after their marriage, Ennis had beaten his mother, who was known as a sweet church-going lady, to death with a baseball bat after shooting her in the face in their trailer in North Montgomery, Alabama, where they lived. Ennis' stepfather, Eddie Joe Flowers, who was known as Alvis because of his sideburns and vibrant personality, was met with the same fate as his wife. After murdering his mother, Rick shot him in the face using a shotgun when Eddie came home from work. After the murder, Ennis drove the family car and crashed into a fence on the side of the highway. Alabama State Trooper John Clark stopped Ennis walking along the highway. When he asked him where his parents were, Ennis told him that he'd killed them. As Detective Clark searched the backpack the young boy was carrying, he found a kitchen knife and some ammunition for a 12-gauge shotgun as well as for a .22 caliber. When asked why he killed his parents, the emotion was 12-year-old and has told the cops that he was mad that his parents planned to move. He said he didn't want to leave the school. For 2 days, investigators believed he lived with their bodies while continuing to go to school. He further confessed about his future plans to kill his 3 stepsisters, which further shocked the investigators at the time. Although his murders were nothing short of gruesome, due to his age, he could not be tried as an adult. As a minor at the time, he was sent to jail for 9 years for the double murder. After he was released, he moved to Auburn where he had then met Lois Leslinski. After Lloyd's disappearance, Rick Ennis was the prime suspect in the case. However, in spite of Ennis's past and loads of circumstantial evidence, it was impossible to charge Ennis for Lloyd's murder without Lloyd's body or any direct evidence. Ennis left Auburn just weeks after his interview with detectives and moved elsewhere, finally ending up in Huntsville, Alabama in 2007. By then, though, Lloyd's case had gone cold. After moving to Huntsville, he soon moved in with a roommate, Abram Sissons. Abram noticed that Ennis brought kitchen rugs with them, which he claimed were a gift from Lori. He also told Abram that he was in love with a woman in Auburn who disappeared without a trace, but did not mention her name. Abram found nothing unusual in these conversations until he learned about Ennis's dark past. He then asked Ennis to leave immediately. Abram later claimed that when he returned to his apartment, it was completely trashed. However, the police recovered the rugs, one of which tested positive for Ennis blood. Abram also claimed later that he saw a Galileo thermometer in Ennis's room before he moved in with him, the same kind that was missing from Lori's home. Sadly, the police could still not link Ennis to Lori's murder at this time. As their prime suspect remained at large, the case remained unsolved while Lori's devastated family waited for answers. For years, this case had no updates. Then in 2016, after a decade, Mark Whitaker, a special agent of the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation, opened a cold case unit and started reinvestigating Lori's disappearance along with his team, which included his longtime partner, Agent J. W. Barnes. Lori's case was their first project, and they began the evidence, sending some of the items to forensic labs for testing and conducting several interviews and re-interviews. After the re-examination of the evidence, Ennis naturally became his main suspect. Agent Mark was aware of Ennis's past, and his gut told them that Ennis had done something similar to Lori, but he had no idea as to how to prove his guilt without more evidence or a body. However, in an unexpected twist, Agent Whitaker's partner, Agent J.W. Barnes, found an important piece of evidence while looking through the files. He discovered a report in an envelope that had not been opened for 10 years. After Lloyd's disappearance in 2006, police collected evidence from the trailer, but no one followed up with it until the results came in. The results showed that semen found on Lori's bedsheet and blood on the interior side of the front door contained Rick Ennis's DNA. After organizing all the evidence, investigators built a strong case against Rick Ennis and were eventually able to get an indictment order in 2018. By this time, Ennis was happily engaged to a school librarian named Alana Atkinson and was living in Pilot, Virginia. There, he was working for a company that designed and built portable living structures called yurts. On August 6, 2018, on his 38th birthday, 12 years after Lori Slosinski went missing from Auburn, Rick Ennis was arrested by task force of U.S. Marshals. While it came as a relief to Lori's family, Ennis's fiancée and co-workers were shocked by this turn of events. After being arrested on 2 counts of capital murder, his trial was postponed due to COVID-19. The trial finally began on April 1, 2022. While the prosecution presented all the evidence that suggested Ennis's involvement in the crime, including the cigarette but in Loy's bedsheet containing his DNA, the defense argued that police could have taken the cigarette from Ennis's home and planted it at the crime scene. They also attacked Lois Slosinski's character by trying to portray her as a drug dealer. To explain how his DNA got on the bedsheet, Rick claimed that he had consensual sex with Lori before her disappearance, suggesting that they were still intimate despite Lori's rejection of his advances. However, his story did not seem very convincing, especially when 2 more witnesses came forward with jaw-dropping information. One of his former co-workers in Alabama, Jeremy Brooks, stated that on June 9, 2006, just 1 day prior to Lori's mysterious disappearance, he received a call from Ennis asking if he could bring him gas and if he could keep the gas tank. It was a way that I would run in and I get nothing else. Later, after police found Loy's scorched car in a gas cam, it matched the description of a gas cam that was missing from the bowling alley where Ennis worked. Another of his former co-workers from South Carolina, Terry Booth, testified about the chilling experience she had with Ennis years prior. Terry remembered asking Ennis why he moved from Auburn. Ennis told him that he had to get rid of a body. Although he thought Ennis was just joking with him, the announcement of his arrest for Lori's murder proved otherwise. Although Rick Ennis continued to deny all allegations against him and maintained his innocence, jurors came up with a guilty verdict after 2 days of deliberation. He was facing the death penalty for the crime, but the DA agreed to take the death penalty off the table after consulting with Arlene. Arlene later said that she felt agreeing to a life without parole sentence for Rick Ennis would save her from years of potential appeal hearings, but would also ensure that Ennis would never be free. On April 14, 2022, he was sentenced to life without parole. He remains incarcerated in William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. For our links roll, he remains incarcerated in William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. For Arlene Slosinski, the outcome was bittersweet. With tears in her eyes, she shared that it meant she had to finally accept that Lori was never coming home, an incredible hope that a portion of her heart always clung to. Let us know in the comment section what your thoughts are on this tragic case. Do you think Rick Ennis will ever give up the location of Lori's remains? Nancy Lagerquist, an 87-year-old resident of Riverside Healthcare Center, was last seen alive on the night of Sunday, July 1, 1990. Around 3:30 a.m., a care worker checked on her and found her sound asleep in her bed. Nancy appeared peaceful and undistressed, so the worker quietly closed her door and moved on to other rooms. Nancy had been living at Riverside since December 1988. Born in Hamilton, Montana, in 1902, she graduated high school at 18 and spent her career as an executive secretary. Before retiring, she was an active member of the Missoula Business and Professional Women's Club. Nancy never married, had no children, and had minimal family connections at the time of her death. Her surviving relatives, a sister, 2 nieces, and 3 nephews, lived far from the care home and were not involved in her daily life. Described as living a quiet and uneventful life at Riverside, Nancy required 24-hour assistance due to her inability to walk. Nothing in her background indicated she might be in danger. However, at 4:30 a.m., just an hour after Nancy was last checked on, a worker entered her room again and raised the alarm. The 87-year-old was gone. The 5 employees on shift scattered across the building in an attempt to locate the elderly woman, but there was no sign of her. 11 minutes later, at 4:41 a.m., the police were alerted to Nancy's disappearance. Law enforcement promptly arrived on the scene, accompanied by search and rescue teams. They carried out an extensive search of the home and the surrounding area. The residence was located along the Clark Fork River, and boats manned by police officers were dispatched along the water. At 6:30 a.m., the search was called off. Authorities had found Matsie dead near the riverbank, about 30 minutes downstream from Riverside. She had been murdered in a manner that was described by police as ritualistic. The circumstances of her death were violent, stemming from sexual assault with an object. Her body was then dumped into the water. To investigators working on the case, it soon became apparent that they would have their work cut out for them. The fact that Nancie's body had been put in the water had washed away any traces of forensic evidence, and her diaper has never been located. The police have never put forward a theory about the weapon used in the murder, and it too has never been found. Detectives soon theorized the culprit had entered and exited through Nancie's bedroom window, which faced the river as the screen had been cut. However, the perpetrator had managed not to leave behind any evidence on the window or sill or in the rest of the bedroom. Furthermore, none of the alarms had gone off at any of the home's entrances, and all were in working order. It's unclear if the home was dusted for prints, but given the amount of staff, residents, and guests coming and going from the home, it would have been a very arduous task if it had. The only lead in the case was a man seen by a member of staff at around 4 a.m. walking through the car park of the neighboring Missoula Athletic Club, away from the river and towards East Broadway Street. He is described as being white, between the ages of 30-40, and weighing around 180 to 200 pounds. He has light brown, collar-length hair, a mustache, and brown-rimmed glasses, and was wearing an untucked white and brown striped t-shirts, tan button front shorts, and white tennis shoes with white socks. His t-shirt was longer at the back than the front. This man was never considered a suspect, but was wanted for questioning. However, it's unclear if he ever made contact with the police or was even identified by them. Reportedly, the description led to the police becoming inundated with reports. Due to Nancie's minimal family ties, a family connection was quickly ruled out, after which the authorities turned their attention to staff members. Staff at the care home would be familiar with its layout and its security measures and would know who was best to target. Investigators felt that the murder could well be an inside job and homed in on one male staff member in particular. He was eventually cleared of being involved, but left the care home less than a month later. It is unclear why he left. After ruling out the staff member, the police began to look at the possibility that the crime was the work of an outsider. They noted that security focused on the doors to the home, not the windows, and speculated that Nancie was picked because she was in a room facing onto the river and was not targeted for any reason more specific than that. They interviewed a man named James Bailey on multiple occasions, but eventually dropped him as a suspect. Eventually, detectives looked back at the witness statements they'd collected regarding any other potentially suspicious deaths in the home. One nurse had drawn their attention to the demise of an 86-year-old woman named Bertha Scott, an Alzheimer's sufferer who was discovered dead in her bed on May 2, 1990. She was put into restraints at night to stop her from wandering off. And because she'd suffered from heart disease, her death was assumed to be from natural causes. Neither the staff nor her Foley felt her demise was suspicious, except for the one nurse who had noted a bruise on Bertha's neck. She was buried without autopsy. Around the time of Bertha's death, the care home staff had also noticed that there had been some tampering with the windows of the physical therapy room, although nothing ever really came of this. On the back of the nurse's comments, the police decided to exhume Bertha's body and double-check her cause of death. Her family was shocked when the police announced that she had actually been raped before being strangled to death. Bertha's life was rather different from Nancie's. She'd been born in Pennsylvania in 1904 and was married 20 years later. She had moved to Missoula just 2 years before her death so that she could be closer to one of her surviving children. 4 of her 6 children had died before her, though she was succeeded by a vast number of grandchildren. During Bertha's medical examination, it was discovered that semen had been left behind. Although a sample was collected, it was too degraded to produce a DNA profile, which would help the police find her killer. From here, both cases grew cold. In 1992, a man of another care home was arrested for sexually assaulting one of the residents. However, he was in prison at the time of the murders. The police also suspected Lloyd Chase Allen of being involved that same year, but he too was behind bars when the crimes were committed. In 2002, the Missoulian reported that several of the care home residents had spoken of a man who roamed the halls at night, but staff had never been sure if he was real or not because the residents' memories and testimony were often unreliable. It's possible this man was real and that there are more cases like Bertha's where residents were killed, but it was deemed that they had died from natural causes. However, without DNA evidence, a confession, or further investigation, it seems likely we will never see this case solved. Wilford Johnson, who went by his middle name Ray, was a veteran of the United States Navy. In 2017, the 90-year-old was a widower, having lost his wife Ola and lived on his own in Longview, Washington. He was considered a fixture in his community, active in his church, and always willing to help his neighbors. He had 4 children, 7 grandchildren, and 15 great-grandchildren, all of whom he enjoyed spending time with. Even at his advanced age, Ray's mind was sharp, and he made sure to keep physically active. On June 29, 2017, sometime between 9 and 10 a.m., Ray's neighbors saw him out for his daily walk. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Ray. Ray's family reported him missing the following morning. His silver 2001 Honda Accord was also missing from the home but was located later that night. However, its discovery only added to the mystery of Ray's disappearance. The car was found in the Gifford Pinchot Forest in Skamania County on National Forest Road 93. This location was more than 130 miles away from Ray's home. According to Ray's family, he had no reason for being in that area. He also had not driven on the freeway in more than 7 years. One of the car's windows was broken when it was found, but police were quickly able to discover why. Pictures of the car were posted on Facebook, and police interviewed the 3 young men who uploaded the images. The young men, unaware that the car belonged to a missing person, found it abandoned and decided to break the window so that they could steal some small items inside of it. Authorities do not believe the young men were involved in Ray's disappearance. The area where the car was found was searched multiple times by multiple agencies, but nothing related to the case was found. Ray's family believes that he was most likely attacked in Longview and that his assailant then drove his car out of town. Ray carried a large amount of cash with him, making robbery a potential motive. A clerk from a dollar store in Longview did come forward after Ray went missing, saying that a man matching Ray's description had been in his store around noon the day Ray went missing. However, the store security footage was not of a good enough quality for Ray's family to tell if it had in fact been Ray in the store that day. Ray did shop at that store, but authorities consider this sighting to be unconfirmed. Ray's disappearance remains unsolved. She achieved the rank of Sergeant First Class and served in Operation Desert Storm in 1991. In 1998, Hattie left the Army so that she could help take care of her aging mother. Hattie was one of 11 siblings and would do anything to help her family. It appears as though Hattie was helping a family member the last time she was seen. Surveillance cameras at a Sheetz gas station at the intersection of highways 501 and 58 in Riverdale, Virginia captured note images of 48-year-old Hattie on May 16, 2009 at 2:30 a.m. Hattie was with her nephew, Derek Brown. Their family believes that Hattie must have been helping Derek because she would not normally be out at that hour. There have been no sightings of her since she left the gas station in her car with Derek. Hattie had organized a bridal shower for her soon-to-be sister-in-law but failed to show up for the event, which alerted her family that something was wrong. Several other details led them to fear that something terrible had happened to Hattie. While Hattie's car, a 2003 Volkswagen Jetta, went missing with her, her wallet, credit cards, medication, and driver's license were all left at her home. Her family says that she never left home without them. She also left behind her beloved Chihuahua Grasshopper, which her family says she would not have done willingly. Virginia State Police monitored Hattie's bank records, but had few other avenues of investigation to follow during the first few weeks after Hattie went missing. That changed on July 7, 2009. That day, a farmer was cutting hay on his property in southeastern Halifax County, Virginia, approximately 15 miles from the gas station where Hattie had last been seen. Behind an old barn, he discovered a badly burned Volkswagen Jetta that appeared to have been behind the barn for some time. When authorities examined the vehicle, they discovered that it belonged to Hattie Brown. The discovery of the vehicle led to speculation that someone local was involved in Hattie's disappearance, because only someone who lived in the area would know that that farmer very rarely visited that section of his property. Following the discovery of the car, Derek Brown was named a person of interest in the case. He and several other people authorities believe may have information about what happened to Hattie have not cooperated with the investigation. Derek has never been charged in relation to his aunt's disappearance, but is currently in prison for burglary and will be released in 2022. 7 years after Hattie went missing, her family made the difficult decision to have her declared legally dead. 3 of Hattie's brothers have passed away in the 10 years since she went missing, never knowing what happened to their sister. Vince Wesselman was a veteran of the United States Army. Even after leaving the Army, he remained dedicated to serving others. While he was employed by a stove company and later a formal wear shop, he was most well known for the work he did on a volunteer basis. He used a week of his vacation time every year to volunteer at a Catholic retreat camp, and he was a longtime volunteer with Habitat for Humanity. He loved to garden and donated the produce he grew to a local food bank. Vince was not married and had no children of his own, but was dedicated to his large family. He had 11 siblings and numerous nieces and nephews. When he built himself a house in Breeze, Illinois in the mid-1960s, he had his parents as well as several of his younger siblings move in with him. He took care of his parents until their deaths. In 2011, 75-year-old Vince finally retired. He was just a few weeks into his retirement when Holy Week began. As a devout Catholic and an active member of St. Augustine Church, Vince had plans to attend church on the several days leading up to Easter Sunday. He spent most of Holy Thursday, April 21st, tearing out flooring in his house that needed to be replaced with his brother, Jerry. The last known sighting event was at 5 o'clock that evening when a neighbor saw him walking down North 1st Street in front of the Breeze Grain Company. Vince liked to stay active, walking or biking every day. Part of his daily routine was also walking down to the post office to buy a newspaper. It is believed that this is what he was doing when he was seen by his neighbor. He has not been seen since. Because Vince was close with his family, they knew that something was wrong when they could not get a hold of him to discuss their plans for Easter. On Saturday morning, 2 of his sisters went over to his house to check on him. His church clothes were laid out on the bed waiting to be worn for one of the Holy Week services. Vince's car, bike, wallet and keys were all inside the home, which showed no signs of forced entry or robbery. The only thing missing was their brother. The community that Vince had given so much to now came together to try to help him. Members of the community went door to door asking for information and searching small buildings. Others took their boats out on area bodies of water to search. 2 search and rescue teams, a small aircraft, and nearly every fire department in Clinton County were a part of the search for Vince. A pond was drained and firefighters pumped water out of an old cellar at the grain company. Neither Vince nor any clues indicating what may have become of him were found despite the massive effort. In July of 2018, Vince was declared legally dead and his family held a memorial mass for him. They have not given up hope of finding answers, however. A $10,000 reward is still being offered for information in Vince's case. Bill Wasco was a 65-year-old Vietnam War veteran who lived in Marietta, Georgia. He was an avid outdoorsman going on hikes throughout Georgia. He also loved Joshua Tree National Park in California and made a visit there almost every year. On June 23, 2010, Bill flew from Georgia to Los Angeles. He rented a car at the airport and drove to Rancho Mirage, where he would be staying in a vacant condo that belonged to a friend. The following morning, he drove to the park for his first day of hiking. Bill had left a detailed itinerary of the hikes he planned to make on this trip, not all of which were within Joshua Tree National Park, back in Marietta with his girlfriend, Mary Winston. Mary was concerned about the hike Bill was planning to make on that first day. Bill wanted to hike out to Carey's Castle, an old miner's hut. The site is so unstable and in such a remote location that the National Park Service does not include it on most maps in an effort to keep people from trying to visit it. Bill had reassured Mary while he was still in Georgia, and when he spoke to her on the phone during his drive to the park, that he would be fine during his solo hikes. He made plans with her to call her around 5 p.m. that night when he estimated he would complete the hike. He was then going to go to dinner at Pappy and Harriet's, a restaurant in nearby Pioneer Town. However, Bill did not call Mary by 5 p.m. that evening. She began calling him, but all of her calls went straight to his voicemail. By the time enough time had passed that she was sure something was wrong, the park's headquarters had closed. It would not be until 8 o'clock the following morning that she would be able to get in contact with a park ranger and alert them to the fact that Bill was missing. Park rangers immediately traveled to the trailhead where Bill would have parked in order to hike out to Carey's Castle. But Bill's rented white Chrysler Sebring was not there, and it appeared as though no vehicles at all had been there in some time. The car would not be found until almost 5 p.m. the following day when a California Highway Patrol helicopter spotted it parked near the Juniper Flats trailhead, which was a 90-minute drive from the Carey's Castle trailhead. This was a common parking area for hikers who were planning to hike up Quail Mountain. Quail Mountain had been listed on Bill's itinerary for his trip, so the search efforts centered on this location. Search and rescue groups from all across Southern California came out to help look for Bill. Volunteers searched on foot and on horseback, and helicopters and small aircraft scanned the area from above. Dogs were brought in to try to track Bill's scent. Databases and algorithms were applied to the case and the terrain in an effort to refine the search area. A major but confusing clue came from Bill's cell phone records. At 6:50 a.m. on June 27th, 3 days after Bill went missing, his phone pinged off of a Verizon cell tower just outside of the park. Bill's phone was 10.6 miles from the tower, which was above the town of Yucca Valley to the northwest of the park, when it pinged off of it. However, this location was so far from Quail Mountain that officials doubted that Bill could have reached it on foot in 3 days. Numerous theories about technological or environmental factors that could have skewed the data provided by the cell phone tower have been suggested, but none of them have been confirmed. This ping was the only activity on Bill's cell phone after he entered the park, most likely because of the lack of service in some of the remote areas he was in or because he turned off his phone to conserve its battery. Despite a meticulous search that seemingly covered every square inch of a massive search area, Bill was not found. The official search was finally called off on July 5th. While the official search for Bill is long over, unofficial searches for him continue to this day. By 2018, other hikers had cataloged more than 1,000 miles of trails that they had searched for Bill's remains. Despite such extensive efforts, Bill has still not been found. Demakia Finizzi served in the United States Army for 5 years. In 2007, the 26-year-old mother of 3 was living in Verona, Mississippi. She was going to school to get her degree in criminal justice and was working as a security guard at the Fillmore Center, an alternative school in Tupelo, Mississippi. The Fillmore Center would be the location of the last known sighting of Demakia. On October 12th, she dropped a friend off at the center in her red Pontiac Grand AM. Later that day, she failed to pick up her children from her sister's home, and her sister reported her missing to the Verona Police Department. Demakia's vehicle was eventually found at the Warfield apartment complex on Jackson Street in Tupelo. According to witnesses, the car had been driven into the parking lot at a dangerous speed, and an African-American man in a white t-shirt and blue jeans had run from the car after parking it, disappearing behind one of the apartment buildings. J.B. Long became the new police chief of Verona in January of 2008. Because Demakia's case had already gone cold by the time he was put in charge of it, he made the decision to turn the case over to the Mississippi Bureau Demakia's picture and case information in hopes of generating new leads, but nothing came of the effort. According to Demakia's family, she would never have abandoned her children. Her disappearance remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stopped seeking the truth.